The problem is significantly worse for adolescent boys than it is for female peers. Their social lives are kind of migrating online in a way that girls' social lives are not. Girls are still spending a lot of social time in person. When you take sports out of the equation, male social time, just like unstructured social time, is so, so low.
This is Ruth Whippman, author and filmmaker. Today we're talking about the future of masculinity, exploring definitions, looking into unconscious biases, and the role pop culture plays in narratives around men and young boys. Society is shifting rapidly, so it raises the question, how can parents from different generations navigate these evolving challenges? To help unpack this vast topic, I'm joined by Ruth Whippman, author of Boy Mom, a book that gives parents tools and information about raising boys today. Whitman's the mother of 3 boys and writes about the complexities of growing up male in today's world. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN, the world's leading trend forecasting company, and you're listening to Lives of Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast about how we live our lives in the future. Ruth, big welcome to the podcast. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners? I'm just very lazy. I get whoever I'm talking to do the hard work.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. No, it's great to be here. So, as you said, my name's Ruth Whippman. I am a journalist and author, and I'm also the mother of 3 boys who are 14, 11, and 7 now. And so, I've written about lots of different topics in my life as a journalist, investigated lots of different social issues and trends. But when my 3rd son was born, it was around the time of the Me Too movement. Donald Trump was a year into his first presidency. Seemed like the whole world was kind of launched into this reckoning around toxic masculinity. And even that phrase alone, it was something I had never really heard before, and there it was. And so that's what prompted me to write the book. It's called Boy Mom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity. And it's basically a mix of memoir, my own story about raising 3 sons, and reporting about the state of contemporary boyhood, the state of contemporary masculinity.
So I'm a stepmom of 3 boys. So
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
so a little bit
Oh,
older
gosh.
than yours. They're 12, 15, and 17. So I am very intrigued and I guess bought into this whole topic. And I guess I'm in a slightly different position because I'm not mothering them. And I sort of quite deliberately have never tried to mother them. They've got an amazing mother and they've got an amazing father. And I'm I kind of see myself there to, I don't know, hopefully add something. And is it harder to be a man today than it was 10, 20 years ago?
So I think it in many ways it is harder. I think in some ways it's not harder. So I would say it's sort of a mix of both. But I think that boys and men, young men today, are caught in a really complex and fraught cultural moment. And I think they feel they're really struggling in a way that perhaps they weren't 20 or 30 years ago. We had a bunch of old problems, that never went away. Some of the old ways that the old pressures that masculinity put onto boys and men as they were growing up, don't speak about your emotions, don't show weakness, don't be vulnerable, you have to be some kind of superhero in certain ways, be tough, be strong. Those things were always, quite psychologically unhealthy for men and boys. And I think they did this work of kind of shutting them down emotionally and psychologically, and also in terms of their connections with other people. So that's kind of an old problem. But in all these conversations around toxic masculinity, instead of trying to fix that problem, we've introduced a bunch of new problems. So the new problems I would see more as, we're in the middle of this kind of conversation about men and boys in which we've really highlighted that they cause harm. And we're not really looking so much at the harm that is caused to them. So there's this kind of narrative, which is like, you don't have any problems, you are the problem. That's a line from Richard Reeves, who writes a lot about this subject as well. And, it's just this idea that you're so privileged, your life is so great, we don't care about your problems, time for you to shut up, and don't speak. Let everybody else have a chance to speak. You're taking up too much space. And I think between the two of them, they're shut down from the old story, which is like, don't show your emotions. And they're shut down from the new story, which is like, you're so privileged, your problems don't matter, you don't really have any problems. So I think boys and men are just caught in this really complicated thing where they feel shut down from all directions.
From what I see in my experience, they see others as being looked after and prioritized over them because historically that was the case, but they don't see that that's the case now. So they will talk about, the girls in their school classes. Sorry, again, talking about my stepkids, but the girls in their classes, they can get away with anything. And I then sort of am trying to explain what it used to be like for women and that therefore there has been perhaps a pendulum swing, but they weren't there when women were treated that way. So why do they now feel that they're the sort of lesser in the battle of the sexes?
Yeah, and I think that's very real. I think I used to be quite skeptical about that narrative. It's just that, oh, boo-hoo, calm down. Women have had it so terrible for so long and still do in so many ways. I want to make sure to say that, the feminist movement is not complete. Women still do have it really bad in many, many ways. I think for this generation of boys, they're absolutely right. I mean, I think they have grown up with seeing a lot of messages about girl power, about, girls rule, boys drool, that they're kind of harmful, that they're toxic, and all these efforts to lift up girls, which are great, and we need to support them. But I think there is this very real narrative that there's something wrong with them, and they feel that very keenly. And I think you're right, they are not responsible for the history of patriarchy, the history of male harm. And I think it's really hard, especially, what they're seeing in their lives is very concrete and very real and very obvious. They're like, shut up, boys message. And their sort of history of male harm is very abstract to them, and it's a lot to ask, certainly a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, but even like a 15-year-old to really hold that in their minds.
Yeah, and I think also we've got to give they're still kids, right? So they're not
Absolutely.
really at the stage where they want to fix the whole world. They care about the bubble that they're in, and I think that should be celebrated. You don't need the world's problems on your shoulders when you're 7, quite
Right.
frankly.
No, I agree with that. I think for a teenager in an age appropriate way, it is, and even for younger kids, I think it is really important to hold in mind this narrative of, there is history to this, that women have been treated badly, have been treated as second class citizens, and we're trying to correct the balance. And sometimes it can be an overcorrection. So I think it is important to sort of seed those ideas. But what I don't think we should be doing is like shaming or punishing this generation of boys for what their fathers and grandfathers and all the rest of history has done. I think that's a very unfair thing.
So what's the advice that you give? So let's start with what advice are you giving to parents,
Mhm.
and maybe not just parents of boys, but just parents full stop, to ensure that there is an equality in terms of how kids are treated and the understanding of what they're going through.
What I try to do is to sort of look at both the old problem and the new problem. So I think that we often in this sort of newer conversation about feminism and patriarchy and all the rest of it, it's like boys have it so great and they never had any problems. And that's not true. I think we need to really look at and center and unpack the problems that boys have always had, which are really, really hard on them. The ways that we sort of encourage boys to disconnect from their own emotions and disconnect from connection, deep, vulnerable connection with other human beings. So I think that we need to highlight that things have always been tough for boys, that patriarchy has benefits for them, but it also has harms, and to do that in an age appropriate way. So we need to look at the old story and we need to tackle the new story. So I think any kind of shaming, any kind of punishing is really not helpful. It just breeds resentment. I think lead with curiosity. Tell us about your actual experience. What is it like growing up as a boy? This generation of boys is experiencing something very different from previous generations. So I think, using our old tools to talk about that is not really helpful. So curiosity, and then, but absolutely, I think at the heart of what we need to do with boys is to lead with care and connection. But with us, this is something that boys have historically missed out on, and that we need to kind of correct for that.
What do you think or why are those stereotypes so damaging? And I would say we've got the old stereotypes, maybe that, you have to be tough and that's what being a man is about. And maybe it's being tough and it's being the provider and those kind of things. And now we've got these horrible new stereotypes being perpetuated by social media influences, and I'm sure we're going to come on to one in particular at some stage in
Yeah.
this conversation. Is it healthy to have any kind of stereotypes, and is it possible to get away from them?
Yeah, I think I'd rather, you know, when we're talking with our kids, have it all on the table and talk about them rather than pretend they don't exist. Have them
Yeah.
as a topic for conversation. But I think what we don't want to be doing is stereotyping our own children, which I think happens really early on with boys. And it's really interesting. You see this way that parents and adults project these kind of masculine stereotypes onto boys right from babyhood. There are studies which show that when adults think that if they're holding a baby and it's dressed neutrally, so they can't tell if it's a girl or a boy. If they are told that baby is a boy, when that baby cries, they believe that he's crying out of anger. And if they're told that they're holding a girl, they believe that she's crying out of distress or fear. And so we're already projecting these things onto like tiny, tiny babies. And then it goes on. And then, there's all this research that shows that we actually treat boys and girls slightly differently right from babyhood. With baby boys, it's like, hey there, little man, and throw them up in the air and toughen them up. And, whereas studies show that girls get around twice as much of what they call caretaking touch, this kind of positive, nurturing touch. Um, you know, and on and on and on. We talk to girls more about their emotions. We use different language when we talk to girls. And all of this is like subconscious bias. We don't realize that we're doing it. We think we're treating them the same. And so I think that even if we think we're not stereotyping boys, we are. And, all
We
these
are.
phrases like boys are like dogs. I don't know if you've ever heard that one.
Oh no, I say that.
I said
I
that
do
until,
say
yeah,
that.
I said it until I started looking at all this research. But, and there's sort of truth in it as well. It's like this idea that, you know, all they need is
Uh,
like
uh,
food and
yeah,
exercise.
ours is like we need to walk the
We
dogs.
need to walk the
Like
dogs, right? It's like
we've got to take them out
they're
and we've
going
got to get them
crazy. Yeah,
outside
and
and
that
yeah.
is very, very real in our house as well. And it's like throw a ball at them and just feed them, and that's all they need. But what it ends up doing is sort of basically perpetuating this idea that they're not emotional, they're not complex, they don't have complex emotions. They're just these very simple creatures that basically need like food and water, and that's it. And I think that really does boys a disservice. We're not really nurturing their emotional life in the same way that we are with girls.
So how do we dismantle then the unconscious bias?
Is so hard because, and look, I've been researching this stuff for so long and I've been steeped in this stuff and I still find myself doing it all the time. And this is the thing. It's not that there isn't any truth in the stereotypes when you're talking about young kids. Look, boys are more physically active on average. There will be a whole range, but on average, as a group, boys are more physically active than girls at a young age. And, so on and so forth. But I think the way we dismantle stereotypes is by knowing about them, is by information and calling them out. And I think we have done that work with girls for a really long time. Like, if you look back at what was totally socially acceptable to say when I was a kid, or when my mom was a kid, or when my grandma was a kid, and now you're like, oh God, I can't believe that that was okay. On so many levels. And I think because generations of feminists did all that work to like really unpack all those messages and look at like body shaming and princess culture and sexism and, you know, what messages we give them in TV and books and movies and all the rest of it. Because we did that work, we've made changes and we need to do the same
Yeah.
work with boys.
Yeah. So you have written about the US landscape at the moment and social media influences, and there are some that are promoting a certain perceived notion of masculinity. How do I guess, what impact is that having? Are your boys aware of that? Does it sort of figure in their world? Do you think it's going to take us backwards?
We're seeing already that it's taking us backwards. I mean, these guys have a huge impact, and I think tech is playing a huge role in this because obviously we have this sort of algorithmic world that we live in where a boy can be easily sent down these pathways. So he'll type into TikTok like fitness routine, and statistically, within about 10 minutes, he's seeing anti-feminist and misogynistic content. So these pathways are just like they're being like shoveled down these pathways by our tech landscape. yes, they're having a huge impact. And we can see that these, boys, as I mentioned, a combination of kind of the old problem and the new problem are making boys very vulnerable in this moment. They're feeling resentful, they're feeling lost, they're feeling lonely. And then these kind of bad actors are coming in and scooping them up. And I think boys are feeling very unheard in their lives, these narratives that we talked about, like,
Yeah.
shut up, your problems don't matter, you're so privileged, your life is so great. They're like, well, I don't recognize that. That doesn't feel right to me. They feel lost, they feel vulnerable, they don't understand this power that they're supposed to
No.
have in the abstract. It doesn't feel real to them. So these guys are really influential. They're very vulnerable to these
Mm.
guys in the manosphere, giving this message of like, you can be powerful, you can be potent, it's all women's fault, it's all,
Yeah.
whoever's fault. And we're already seeing, the election in the US, we see that young men had a huge impact on that. They're moving politically to the right. There's this sort of groundswell of
And well, not just in the US, right? The political pendulum, I think
right.
I've used that word already in this thing, but that's happening all over the world.
Absolutely. And I think masculinity is at the heart of that. At the heart of authoritarian politics is anxiety about masculinity. That is like this kind of psychic motor that's driving the whole thing.
Yeah. So is it the tech company's responsibility to do something about this? Is it parents' responsibility to take their kids off their smartphones? I mean, that's a huge topic in and of
Yeah.
itself.
Well, I think it's everything. So, yes, I think that the tech companies, I would rather see the tech companies take responsibility than putting it all on the shoulders of parents. I think there's a
Yeah.
narrative, it's all your individual responsibility. But we're up against these like corporate giants that have all of the finest,
Yeah.
smartest minds in the world and all of the money and
Yep.
all of the everything. So, I think it's a bit unrealistic to say that parents can tackle this on their own, although there are things that parents can do, obviously. But yes,
Yeah.
I would love to see tech companies take responsibility for this and to really look at it. And, I've had brief meetings with a couple of these companies and, we've talked about this stuff and they're aware of it. And I think they want to help,
Do
but
they
there's,
care?
they, it's hard to know. They do a good show
Hmm.
of caring, but the results,
Hmm.
they don't seem to be doing that much. And I can see that there are lots and lots of barriers to doing stuff about it, but I
Yeah.
also do not believe that it's impossible.
Impossible. It's no. I would definitely agree with you on that. Speaking to the production team who
Yeah.
had spoken to you before you and I jumped on this podcast, I know you feel qualities should be genderless, and you don't love the term positive masculinity,
Yeah.
which I found really interesting. So tell me a little bit more about that as a concept.
Yeah, so this is a really complicated one and it's controversial. I've had a lot of pushback on it. But my own view is something like, if we're talking about sort of traditionally masculine coded qualities, so like strength or bravery or assertiveness or agency, those kinds of things, toughness. Or if we're talking about sort of more feminine coded qualities like nurturing or empathy or friendship, I don't believe that those things should have a gender. I believe that all humans should have both like power and agency and toughness and
Yeah.
relationships and empathy and nurturing and all the rest of it. And I think actually, why don't we just take the gendered language out of all of this stuff and we teach boys and girls to access all of these qualities? They're all essential for a healthy, thriving life.
Yeah.
So I would rather that when we're working with boys, instead of saying positive masculinity, we just gave them freedom to be fully human, however that looks for them.
Okay. Right. We're going to get to know you a little bit better before we come back to this topic. So, these are quick fire questions. You're offered the chance to rewrite the ending of 1984 or the last Harry Potter book. Which one and why?
Well, I've got to say it's probably going to have to be 1984 because I've read the Harry Potter series like 3 times now with my 3 kids, and every time when it gets to the Quidditch World Cup, which is about in book 4, I'm just like, I cannot go on with this book anymore. It's so boring. Like, I love the books up until that point, but this Quidditch World Cup goes on for ages and ages and ages, and I feel like I do when I'm in the real World Cup. So I never actually got to the ending, so I don't know how it ends.
Right. One voice can be used to narrate your books for the rest of time. Whose voice are you choosing?
Oh, well, this sounds like so narcissistic, but I would choose my own voice. I did narrate the audiobooks. So I did narrate the audiobooks for both Boy Mom and my previous book, America the Anxious. And it was a really profound and special experience. Also really cringeworthy because there's, hearing your own voice is awful, and hearing your own voice.
I hate hearing my own voice.
It's just,
Yeah, I
it's
absolutely
so
hate it.
excruciating. And then hearing your own voice, reading your own words is even worse. But But it's so personal. It's my stuff. It's my kids. I'm talking about my life and all of my feelings. And I think putting those words in somebody else's mouth would just be a bit weird. So I'm going to go with mine.
Bit
Yeah.
strange. Okay. Last film to move you emotionally.
My husband and I have been watching Couples Therapy, and I love that show. And I used to work in documentaries and in TV, and I think that just every story in that is amazing and moving and special. And like they're these ordinary couples, and you think one person's the villain when you start, and then you realize that somebody else is the villain, or that nobody's the villain. You know, that's what ends up happening. Everyone is fully human. Everybody's a person with a story, and it's like, yeah, I found it very moving.
What's your morning hack?
Oh, I don't think I have a hack. I think if I can like make it through the morning, then that's hack enough.
It's an honest answer. I asked for the first thing that came into your head. It's definitely a valid
Thank
answer. Actually, the last question is, when was the last time you didn't have an answer? Well, I think we've sort of just
Yeah, that one.
answered that
Yes.
very question. Can I ask you, actually, just on the narrating your own books, and because they're very personal, what do you think your kids will think when they read these books in the future, presuming they haven't read them now?
My oldest has read Boy Mom, and he read it at school, and he was actually really fun. He really, really liked it, and I was so nervous about him reading it. We talked about what was in it, and I asked his permission to talk about him in that way, but his permission is not particularly meaningful when he's like, 11 or 12 or whatever age he was when I was, going through the process of writing it. And he really liked it, and he was really interested in it. He was genuinely interested. There's a
That's
chapter about
good.
incels. There's a chapter about, sexual violence and consent. And in a way, it was like a really good way to have those conversations with him. So it was
Yeah,
really nice. My middle one's a bit more stubborn. I think he's going to be, if any of them have a problem with it, it's going to be him. And he hasn't read it yet.
it's going to
Yeah.
be him.
So,
Okay. Brace
yeah.
yourself for that one. Okay, let's look to the future a little bit and how this might evolve. So we picked up on the social media channels. Do you have hope that some greater force is going to step in and make this easier? Where are you looking for
Mm.
answers to counter the situation we're in at the moment?
I am really heartened by the fact that it feels like for the first time in the mainstream, we are actually having these conversations. There are voices and people who are doing such great work, sort of advocating for men and boys in a way that is not anti-feminist or anti-women and girls. I
Yeah.
think we're starting this narrative. It's in this like embryonic phase, which is like, I think for a while there, especially in the early years post Me Too, it was like you almost had to pick a side. Like if you were on the left, you were like advocating for girls and women. And if you were on the right, you were advocating for men and boys. And it took on this like really horrible kind of men's rights activist, like sexist, anti-feminist tinge. And I think there's a growing body of people who are like, hang on, this zero sum thinking is ridiculous. We all have to live together. The system's harming all of us. And so I think there are so many people doing good work that I hope that that will, really
Yeah.
advocating for boys in a way that's healthy, and I hope that that will prevail.
Yeah, and you do not want to set any child up for a lifetime of conflict in any I mean, that sounds really big, but this is, you're going to live with women. You probably live with women in some shape or form, whether it's a mother, a stepmother, a sister, whatever that might look like. And that if it is the other because you feel someone's being treated differently, which has been the historical issue, we're never, and this is it's generationally sort of embedded in us then, right? It is difficult to fix it in a decade or 2 decades
It's
time.
really difficult, but one thing that's been really special for me since coming out with this book, I thought, title like Boy Mom, I was like, no man will ever pick up this book. They'll never like look at it. It will be. But what I've had is lots and lots of men, and some of them are dads and some of them are not dads, but so many men have emailed me and said, I read your book and I felt so validated and so seen, and it made me able to name these things in my past and in my childhood that I kind of suspected, but I didn't know how to articulate. And, it's helped me reach out to my son. It's helped me reach out to, to other men in my life to try to form deeper connections, or with my own boys. And that has been really, really special. So I feel like this work, it's really slow. Cultural change is so slow. There's no quick fix, but it does happen. It is real. We've seen much, much, much cultural change happen in our lifetimes with women, with gay marriage, with, LGBTQ rights, et cetera, et cetera. And we can do it. I feel hopeful that we can
Yeah.
do it for boys too.
Can we talk a little bit about displacement? So there's a term you're using to describe real world social time with screen time. How do you see that changing in the future from where we are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Displacement is a term that researchers use to mean that time that you would otherwise spend doing something like sleeping or socializing or reading or whatever it is, you are now boys and well people are now spending it on screens instead, and that is a problem for everyone, adults, children, all genders, everything. But the problem is significantly worse for adolescent boys than it is for female peers. Their social lives are kind of migrating online in a way that girls' social lives are not. Girls are still spending a lot of social time in person. And boys, it's often through like video games. You'll see this classic thing of like two boys in their own houses, like playing video games, over headsets. And it's connecting and social in one sense, but not in the way that like really meeting with a person in real life. And also sort of YouTube, Discord, these sort of. So I think that when you take sports out of the equation, male social time, just like unstructured social time, is so, so low. They're spending so little time doing it. So the future, I mean, I think there is a real appetite to change it. And I think in our own homes, we just have to really look at this and like really value in-person social connection in the same way that we value, with our kids, like doing their homework or brushing their teeth, or, we need to see it as an absolute non-negotiable. And it's hard because kids are losing their social muscle to do it. They're losing their skills.
Yeah. But I also think that some of that is coming from the kids themselves. And again, that might be my experiences, but there is also now a sort of badge of honor in not being on your screen all the time because everyone else is. So, in that trying to be unique and trying to not be part of the flock, even though they still do want to be part of the flock, there is you've been on your screen all time and, you don't know that because you've been on your screen all time. And I'm hearing more of that, and not just in my own household. In some of the research we've done at WGSN,
A
you've
push
actually
from
got,
the kids. Yeah,
stats about
I think that's I
exactly.
really
Yeah.
love that you said that. And yeah, my kids have the phrase an iPad kid. And it's like a disparaging thing. And that, like, my two older boys will be like,
Yes.
oh, their little brother, he's an iPad kid, whenever he wants to go on a screen. And it's like they're self policing it in a way that is, yeah, so
Yeah.
there is hope in there. I think it is really great. And, I think the human spirit, I really believe in it. It sounds so pretentious, but at some fundamental level, I think human beings want to connect. They want to be with other human beings.
Yeah, they
And
do. They do.
so,
Yeah.
these things are powerful, but humans are more powerful, I think.
There is this driving consumer need, and when there is enough of consumer need, because it's going to make people money,
Things
that
happen.
you will then see
Yeah,
businesses
it's true.
trying
I
to
mean, I
move
would love
in.
to see it
Yeah.
happen without a financial imperative, because I think what happens is this, like, you need a critical mass. So this is like in our neighborhood, for example, like when I was growing up, kids used to play outside, and you need enough kids to be outside for it to be a thing. Like, you can't, I say to my kids, I'll go play outside on the street, but like, what will they do? There's nobody there. And so you need enough people. So I think that can come, parents have power in this. And I think, we've been in our community, and especially, with my 11-year-old, a lot of the parents were really pushing for them to have independence. And we're like, the other day, my son wanted to like walk to his friend's house, and it was really far. It was like a really long way. And I was like, you're going to get lost. And we were like, should we do it? Should we not? And then we were like, yeah, let's do it. I think
Yeah.
having the
Yeah.
confidence to be like, what's going to happen? That they'll get lost. So fine, if they get that lost, then someone can come and pick them up. But actually, there are real consequences to not doing that. Yes, something could happen to them when they're out, but like if they're not out, if they're never out, then there are definitely consequences in terms of, their social development,
Yeah. What they're
what they're
seeing
seeing
online.
online, but also just like they're lonely and disconnected, and that is, if anything in life, I've written about this a lot. If anything in life promotes well-being and thriving, is social connection. There's like so much
Yeah.
research on this.
Yeah.
And so we need to set our kids up for that.
Yeah, we absolutely do. We at WGSN have forecast a lot around play and the
Yes.
power of it and its importance. It's become a big topic on this podcast, even on non-dedicated podcasts
Yeah.
about this. You've paid close attention to things like the
Yeah.
marketing of Lego to young boys and girls. What impact is that having on a
Yeah.
journey for kids through to
I think
adulthood?
Lego is such a fascinating case study in terms of like gender, our ideas about gender and culture and how they've shifted. And if you look at it through, through the recent history. So with Lego, like when I was growing up, Lego was like a gender neutral toy and the marketing was gender neutral and it was just like bricks, colored bricks. And then they were worried that they were not drawing in enough girls. So they launched the Lego Friends line, which, it was all pink. It was so heavily, heavily, heavily girl coded. So it's like pink, it's sparkly, it's like beauty salon, horse stables, sleepover.
Yeah,
But what's really notable about that is that this idea of friends was considered to be a gendered concept, like feminized. And this is something that I write about a lot in Boy Mom, is this idea that friendship is somehow feminized. A
a
girl
girl
thing, like
thing.
girls and friendship
Yes.
bracelets and friendship and who's your best friend and all these narratives around friendship. Whereas boys have a lot of narratives about battles and winning and competition and violence. It's not so much about forming these human relationships. So it was like when they decided that they wanted something girly, like Friends was where they went to. But obviously the effect of that is sort of further excluding that from boyhood. Friends is girly, it's effeminate. We don't really want that. The Lego that was marketed at boys was becoming more and more and more violent. So there was the study, it was the University of Canterbury, I think. So when Lego, in the 70s, there were just like a few weapons in the sets. And there were many of these like obscure medieval weapons that you haven't really quite heard of and you don't know. And then fast forward to now, about a third or more of the sets that are marketed to boys have like a lot of weapons. They have guns, like extreme violence depicted in them. So there's sort of gender piece. So you're seeing it splitting off that like girls are getting like friends and sleepovers and whatever. Right. And boys are getting enemies and violence. And so we're just like we're teaching them really different narratives about, who they are in the world, how they should respond to other people, their sort of, their understanding of what human connection is. And so but there was, like, so much pushback about Lego Friends, and then I noticed that just as this book was coming out actually and I was writing the epilogue, I went to Target, the big sort of superstore with my son, and I saw that the Lego Friends franchise had expanded to include boys, and it was this magical thing that they had, like there was Oliver and Dan or whatever they were called, they were, like, boy characters in the sets. There'd been no boy characters, and the sort of heavy, heavy pinkness of it had been toned down, and there was some, like, teal in there or whatever. And he was seeing like boys included in these like relational stories. And it was really special to see. And I bought the set straight away. And, it was and my son really enjoyed it. Like he likes friends, he likes people, he likes, being in Oliver's bedroom or whatever. And the idea that that's gendered is so depressing.
To look forward, it's often helpful to look back. I know your father isn't with you anymore, but what conversations did you have with him about masculinity? And do you have brothers and sisters? Sort of what did you grow up with?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I have an older sister who is 4 years older than me. And what conversations did I have about with my dad about masculinity? None, ever. And not just with my dad, but with anybody. I don't remember ever talking about masculinity until about 5 years ago. And yeah, it's interesting. Like masculinity was just like not something we discussed at all. It was there and it dominated everything, but like in an invisible way. Just the water we swam in.
Okay, so my final question, are you more anxious or hopeful for the future?
I don't know which way it will go. I want to hold on to hope. I think, we should try to hold on to hope because there is a lot of hope and because that's how we become our best selves that can like do something and be galvanized. I think if we just fall into despair, then it's just like, well, there's no one around to fix it. We lose agency, we lose any sense of like moving forward. And so I think we have to hold on to hope, if we want to make change.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you so much, Ruth Whippman, author and filmmaker. Please check out our other podcast, Create Tomorrow, with my colleague Cassandra Napoli. But that's everything for now. Thank you so much. I'll return with a new episode of Lives of Tomorrow in 14 days. My name is Carla Buzasi. I'm the CEO of WGSN, and I'll see you next time.